Sparse areas of trees littered the pastures, but nothing very dense or large. Just calm, peaceful hills as far as the eye could see. To the south, however, was a short area of pasture, maybe 100 feet or so, then miles of dense, thick forest. An area completely untouched by civilization, unchanged since the arrival of the pilgrims and settlers of centuries past. It was from these woods that the source of my childhood fear lay dormant, a memory that I had repressed that has recently come out through a series of therapy sessions designed to awaken repressed memories. Here is the recounting of those events, the best I can remember. This was a summer in the mid-90s, the time just before the advent of the internet would come and take away the desire for kids to play outside a lot. That wasn't the case for me. My go-to activity was playing basketball outside, especially after dark. Not only did the darkness provide comfortable temperatures for me to play out the imaginary games and buzzer-beating 3S in my head, but I also appreciated the ambience. Our large light pole providing a wide, gentle glow, which was all the illumination I would need to play. I was immediately shaken, my vivid childhood imagination running wild with what possibilities could be lurking in the darkness. Eventually, the torch reached the edge of the woods. An old woman stood holding the light source at the edge of the trees. The slightly dark tinge of her skin led me to immediately identify her as a Native American. She wore a very tattered, dirty dress and wore a crown adorned with deer antlers. Her eyes held a piercing quality, the type of stare that would make even the most stoic of adults squirm under its gaze, and it was laser-focused right on me. Her mouth opened very slightly as if to speak. "Come!" was all she said, a dark, scratchy whisper that reached my ears despite the woman being a good 100 feet from my location. For a brief moment, I was frozen, my heart thudding against my chest harder than I thought was possible. I should run into my house. My brain knew that was the smartest course of action, but I felt as if I was not in complete control of my body. Her whispered, "Come," constantly scratched an itch in my brain akin to the most powerful drug you've ever taken. I was unable to resist. Dropping my basketball, I began to slowly walk towards her, the dull bounce of my basketball hitting the ground and slowly bouncing to a stop, the only sound accompanying the dull drone of insects in the night. As I approached through the pasture, she turned back into the woods. She stayed just far enough ahead to keep her torchlight from ever reaching me. As I strayed away from the light of our driveway and into the woods, I was completely enveloped in total darkness. The type of darkness that is only known by those living in God-forsaken lands far away from all civilization, where even the light of the stars was not visible due to the canopy above. The only thing I was able to see was the faint torchlight off in the woods, a beacon that told my feet where to step and kept me marching forward in my entranced state. As we marched on, I was overcome by the feeling of being watched, surrounded by darkness, and the eyes of 1,000 beasts and souls invisible to me. Soon the crackle of my feet against stones and sticks was accompanied by indistinct whispers coming through the darkness all around me, so faint that I couldn't even be sure if they were really there at all, or just conjurations of my possessed imagination. I walked through the forest, following the faint light through the trees for an indeterminate amount of time. When thinking about it logically, it was probably only 10-15 minutes of walking, but in my altered mental state, it felt like hours. Eventually, a clearing came into view. However, as I was about to leave woods and enter the clearing, the woman turned sharply towards me. During this brief moment, I was jarred by the realization that her eyes now had no pupils visible, just the whites of her eyes glared at me as if they were rolled back into her head. In the same cold, scratchy voice, she whispered, "Stop." I then halted at the edge of the tree line, staring at the faint torchlight and the other creatures it illuminated at the edge of the clearing. In addition to the woman, there were two others. Try as I may, when I'm trying to recall the images of the others, my brain feels like it experiences some sort of glitch, and I'm unable to firmly grasp what I was seeing. They are merely distorted, vaguely humanoid figures in my field of vision. Maybe these two creatures were men, just like the one I would grow up to become, or maybe their terror and strangeness is beyond what our human minds are able to comprehend. The woman turned back and spoke to the others in a strange language involving a series of clicks and whines, and despite not having ever heard or studied this language, I was able to comprehend its meaning as if I was a fluent speaker. The witness has arrived. Begin. A series of guttural, distorted sounds began to emanate from the others, almost like the static sound you hear coming from a television when the signal is lost, but with a deep, terrifying tinge. A horrifying darkness descended on the clearing. All stars were blocked, erased by the overwhelming blackness. Even the torch the woman was holding seemed to dim, where it was only a faint glimmer in the oppressive darkness. The sounds I had heard surrounding me earlier increased in pitch, leaving no doubt that they were not just objects of my vivid imagination. The sounds of the others continued to escalate, increasing in volume and frequency. As I listened, I felt that my mind was going to pop, that all sanity was leaving my human form and melting into a puddle on the ground beneath me. I shivered and seized in my standing position, but my eyes remained focused on the small, faint sliver of light given off by the torch. Eventually, when I felt that my body and mind could handle no more of this onslaught, a loud pop ripped through the air. The oppressive darkness was not immediately gone, but was slowly fading back to normal levels of reality. The glow of the torchlight increasing in brightness through the darkness, returning to the point where I was just barely out of its reach at the edge of the clearing. The two others were gone. In their place stood a tall figure, easily twice the height of the woman, a naked humanoid covered in thick hair composed of oily blackness. Its face gaunt and intimidating, with a long beard and thick deer antlers protruding from its skull. Its eyes glowed with a dark green, and it turned and met me with those eyes, staring into my very soul. Without saying a word, it spoke into my mind with the deepest, most haunting voice I'd ever heard. "You will return when it is time." After the words of the abomination, he and the woman simply vanished from sight. I regained control over my body and took a seat on the ground, shivering in stunned fear. I suppose it's not surprising that the level of fear and strangeness I experienced was repressed. Even when uncovering this memory, I feel the same wave of fear. I question whether it was even real at all, or if I simply had some sort of psychotic break and wandered into the woods on my own accord. In spite of this, as I sit here writing this from my childhood memory, I feel drawn again to the woods south of my childhood home. My parents still live there. I could easily go visit them and take a walk to the clearing again. In fact, the draw seems almost irresistible. I think, no, I know I will be returning there again this coming weekend, I suppose, or maybe tonight. Yes, tonight I'll return to my parents' house and walk deep into the woods once the sun has gone down. No one will notice I'm missing this time and come search for me if I'm left in a quivering mess on the ground in the woods. I sure hope this is a psychotic break and that I will not find some sort of unimaginable horror waiting for me in the forest clearing. When I was a child, I was used to Santeria being a big part of my family's culture. I was used to seeing my grandmother, my mom, my aunts, and great-aunts pray, but in a ritualistic fashion. They prayed as if their prayers were a spell, something darker than one might see at a usual Catholic Mass. Most of their prayers involved a woman named Janie. I was never quite certain who she was, as she wasn't a relative or an associate of the family business, But she always seemed to be around, and she always seemed to have a very pleasant, almost mystical sense about her. I came to find myself very comfortable with Janie, as if she was just another part of the family. When I'd ask who she was to me, my family would say that she was just a family friend, but our relation was never actually established. Still, it was strange to me that one very average summer night, my parents woke me up to packed bags and excitedly claimed that we were going on a trip with Janie and that a few members of our extended family would be joining. My family traveled across Texas frequently. Trips to Houston or San Antonio were not uncommon, and my family always preferred driving at night. I enjoyed this because I found a sense of serenity looking out the window and seeing nothing but darkness as we drove by. Sometimes the light from the headlights would illuminate surrounding trees, and I watch out for deer or other animals caught off guard. There was a sense of mystery and terrifying thrill in the darkness of the Texas countryside. It was late that night, and I was still very tired. I played my usual game, staring out the car window as mysterious trees passed us by, wondering what mysteries lurked behind the brush. Yet I never thought to question where we were going, or even why. It had been a rather boring summer, and I was silently relieved to finally have a vacation story to tell when school began again in the fall. We drove for just over an hour before I recognized the causeway that separates Port Isabel from South Padre Island. I loved the beach, and we hadn't been in ages. The fact that we traveled at night most certainly meant that we would be visiting the local water park in the morning, and in my half-asleep haze, I smiled and felt a natural sense of excitement. I was an only child, so these moments of thrill and joy were far and few a many. We reached the island and I dozed off again, assuming my parents would wake me up when we'd arrived at our resort or hotel. I was awoken just a half hour later, only we weren't outside of a hotel at all. We were at a beach access on the outskirts of the usually populated shore. There was a sense of pride in her voice as she led me away, telling me that it was time to get in the water. I remember the water being extremely cold, colder than I had ever imagined. What was stranger still is that my mother led me into the ocean while we were still wearing the outfits we had arrived in. In fact, I hadn't seen a single person with a swimsuit towel or usual beach gear. I grew anxious about the fact that I was standing in the Gulf in jeans and a t-shirt, but to a child like myself, there was still a sense of excitement and adventure in the event, so I didn't question it. I remember the moonlight shining bright and full, the only thing illuminating the shore and the blurry faces of my relatives as they huddled on the narrow shoreline. My mother led me deeper into the sea and started to pull my shirt off. Up to that point, that was the only practical thing that seemed to have been taking place. She helped me out of my soaking jeans, leaving me in my briefs, which she proceeded to take off as well. At that point, I was standing naked in the ocean, freezing, and lit only by a seemingly brightening moonlight. It was tea until she rubbed the gunk on my face and I managed to taste it that I realized she had coated the vast majority of my body in honey. Once she was done, she began to remove her own clothes, her shirt, her jeans, then her bra and panties. I was in a state of shock and natural disgust, as no little boy wants to see their mother naked. She then began coating her own body in honey, yet the shock of her nudity was overpowered still by the sheer confusion of my standing in the ocean covered in honey. I was so distracted by my mother's naked body. She reached for my hand and softly placed something round and cold in my palm. It was an egg. She crouched down to my level and told me to submerge the egg under water. I hesitantly and frightfully obliged. As I did, she pressured my head under the water's surface, very much like one might baptize a child, and when I resurfaced, she demanded that I hold the egg down to the sandy ocean floor and crush it with my hand. I did. As I pulled the cracked shells and thick yolk residue out from beneath the surface, I noticed that my hand was covered in a thick, black substance. I asked my mom what we were doing there again, but again I received no response. I was carried to the car where a change of clothes was awaiting me. I didn't ask any more questions. It must have been 3 or 4 in the morning by then. We drove to a nearby Whataburger and then made the hour-long trip back to our house in McAllen. When I awoke the next afternoon, it felt like the whole thing had been a dream, yet I knew I had eaten Whataburger the night before. It was all far too real in spite of its surreality. I asked my family if we would be returning to the beach, and they said no, that we were vacationing in San Antonio that summer. I asked about the night before, and they immediately denied it. What I found strange then, and stranger still in hindsight, is that they found no humor in my story, considering their denying the entire thing. It was a subject they avoided, and a question they silenced quickly and aggressively. I stopped asking after a couple of years, and although I knew it wasn't a dream, left it in the back burner of my mind until it became a strange memory that only arose when triggered. We never saw Janie again after that, and the memory became less and less present in my daily train of thought, soon overshadowed by the traumas of adolescence and young adulthood. It wasn't until right now, sitting in the living room of some friend's apartment, sharing strange stories, that it surfaced again. I told my story thinking that people would find it just as far-fetched and probably as made up as I found most of theirs, until one of my friends began to cry and left the room. She had experienced the exact same thing when she was 10 years old enough to remember it clearly, old enough to know that she was never supposed to talk about the event. She was hesitant to mention details, but after I implored, she admitted remembering having stood in the outer circle, removing her clothes and coating herself in honey surrounded by her parents and 9 strangers. As a small boy whom she didn't know was led to the center of the circle and forced to break an egg under the water's surface. We've done a little research, but have yet to find any explanation for the event we had both experienced at different points in our lives. This is still a mystery, and it'll likely remain one unless anyone has experienced it too. We aren't sure we'll ever find out why we were involved in these rituals, but for now, they remain strange childhood memories. Around 2003, my siblings and I moved to a densely wooded area of northeast PA called Shohola. I was 10 or 11 at the time. My mother was obsessed with the idea of living in a log cabin, and her dreams came to fruition, much to our dismay. It wasn't a bad house, really. Aside from the carpenter ant problem, it was quiet back there. I much preferred this to living in a nosy community where people fussed over the length of your lawn. Here, we were in the wild. Most of our days were spent outside exploring, turning over rocks, chasing frogs, and inspecting animal tracks. We felt like pioneers catching crayfish in the creeks and building rafts to float down the lazy river. Our mom gave us a limit to how far we could wander, but we never listened. Biking as far down the dirt road as we dared, we passed houses belonging to neighbors we barely talked to. Most days we stuck together, but occasionally I would sneak off to go on my own adventures. That's when I found it. My sister didn't believe me at first. The driveway was well hidden, tree branches hanging low over the entrance and dead leaves blanketing the cracked pavement. But it was real, and it was a mystery. Ducking under some rusty chains, We passed a decomposing car half swallowed by long grass. At the end of the long driveway, the abandoned house loomed before us. It had several stories and a two-car garage, but every door was locked. The windows were boarded up. There was no visible way in or out. Parking our bikes, we walked around the building, searching for clues to the previous owners or some way to look inside. The back porch was so rotted, my brother broke the steps leading up to it. We decided going inside might not be a great idea. Who knew how bad the interior was? Poking around revealed some old toys, a moldy doll with a strange bob cut, and some other curious items buried in the leaves. My sister searched for more trinkets as I listened to the forest. The trees groaned back there. It was a common noise. Trunks swaying in the wind would creak and moan, but for some reason, that sound seemed eerie to me. You ever get a bad feeling about something? A weird chill that you can't explain? Well, I felt very cold being around that place, so I got on my bike and called for my siblings. At first, my brother said I was a wuss, but he agreed that there was too really much else to do there, so we all headed back home. My sister kept the doll to show my mom. She said the style was from the 70s, but that it was filthy and she should get rid of it. Naturally, my older brothers decided to blow it up with some firecrackers and burn the remains in the fire pit. Later that night, I asked my sister if she felt anything strange about the abandoned place. Yeah, it gave me some bad vibes too. We probably shouldn't go there again. Laying in bed, I thought about this. Something about the locked doors and boarded windows made me wonder what happened. It wasn't long before I started to dream about the house. The hidden driveway stretched endlessly. Dry leaves crunched as I trudged through them, pushing my little bike. Something was pulling me towards the decaying structure. Whether it was my curiosity or something more sinister, I didn't know. All I knew was that I couldn't stop my legs, even as the growing dread started to squeeze my heart. The house was close now. I tried to get on my bike, to pedal away, and never look back. But my feet didn't listen. They were under a spell, hypnotized by whatever beckoned me. The skeleton of the car watched me pass, weeds strangling the broken headlights, and then I was before the decrepit building. The front door lay open, no boards on the windows, nothing stopping me from entering. I screamed at myself as I dropped the bike and walked inside the gloomy entrance. My mother said I was having night terrors. I didn't want to tell her that I was dreaming about a place I found. Venturing far beyond the line she set down for us. The next day, I vowed to visit the place and face my fears, but the driveway was exactly how I dreamed it. I swallowed nervously, wondering if the door would be open when I got closer. As I snuck under the chains, the dull rattle echoed, following me as I walked reluctantly. My heart raced as drew nearer. The old car grimaced, the corroded grille jutting like teeth. I was standing in the shadow of the house. Hands shaking, I parked the bike and looked up. The door was shut. The boards were still on the windows. I sighed in relief. Looking up, I squinted at the attic window. There was nothing barring it except for curtains shrouding the interior. A slit of darkness separated the faded cloth, but I couldn't see anything. There was a funny smudge on the glass. It was different color than the rest of the fabric. Then it moved and the curtains closed. I pedaled home faster than the wind that day. Sometimes I think about those curtains, wondering if it wasn't my imagination. Maybe it was a rat, the breeze, some plausible explanation. I try to tell myself that it could have been anything but a hand.